Hi, my name is Kevin Panahi. I'm here from FARO Delivery. I want to thank Grafana for hosting me and my team here today. I'm the senior site reliability engineer here at FARO. I've been at FARO a little bit over a year now, but I've been in the DevOps platform space for about 8 years. And so today we're going to talk about the operational readiness review that we do here at FARO and how we use Grafana dashboards as the starting point for a lot of those conversations. So for those of you who don't know what FARO Delivery is, we are a home grocery and food delivery service. We operate under the HEB umbrella. We're Texas only. We're proudly unavailable in 49 states is one of our fun taglines. And if you've in the Austin area, you've probably seen the big gold billboards advertising FARO Gold or our cowboy ads that are going around for our Texas 2 stops. So that's who we are. We have a little bit about the team here. We have 12 squads in our engineering department, 2 of which are the SRE and DevOps teams. Both of those teams have 4 people on them, a principal. On ours, I put staff, sorry, a boss. We have a principal, 2 seniors and a mid-level, and then we also have our DevOps team, which I point out just because we work super closely with them. So a lot of what SRE is discussing in these things is kind of coming from DevOps as well. The rest of them are just our normal software engineering teams, and yeah. Okay. So about FARO. So let me just kind of set where our monitoring position was when we started, or when I started, really. We had just gotten a lot of our services onto Kubernetes. We were historically kind of a big Beanstalk shop, and we moved to Kubernetes and kind of adopted the microservice architecture. Around the same time, we also just had a huge headcount increase in the engineering department. So we went from really small concentrated teams to the 10 other software engineering teams, adding an SRE team. SRE was a little over a year old when I joined. And so that's kind of where we went to. There was a lot of growing pains, big one being just kind of noisy alerts that weren't very helpful and kind of just paged people and no one knew what to do with them. When I was interviewing, I actually interviewed with one of our senior software engineers, and I just asked, hey, SRE is this new thing here. Why do you want an SRE department at your company? And he said, I kind of just don't know what's going on. And it's kind of an alarming thing to hear from somebody. So that's kind of where we were at. So we were trying to find a way to kind of implement a good solution for most of our services and get that visibility in there. So we had Istio be our superhero for this. Istio is a service mesh that operates inside your Kubernetes cluster. It manages all of our layer 7 networking traffic within the cluster. Along with Istio, you get fun things like metrics. Might have heard of them at a Grafana conference. And these metrics communicate the most important things to us for today is request response codes, so your 200s, 400s, 500 response codes, and also your application latency, so how fast is your service responding to requests sent to it. Istio is kind of injected as a sidecar into our pods, and then that sidecar is what produces these metrics that we are reporting and alerting on. Those metrics are then consumed by Alloy and then shipped to Grafana Cloud, where all of the recording rules and alerts are set up. So we have these metrics, and so now we're going to turn these into service level objectives. So to have an SLO, you need an SLI, or a service level indicator. So thinking about the 4 golden signals that you look at in the SRE world, we're going to start with we started with the 2 easiest ones, which are availability and latency. Most of our services are API services, so this is a pretty good fit for them. For availability, we just looked at all responses that were not 500 responses. We viewed those as successful, and then 500 responses were viewed as failed requests. We measured those from the perspective of the caller. So if you think of a client server, we measured what the client received. That's just because if a client's getting 500s, the application didn't work. I don't care what the application thought it did. This is what it actually did. So that's the perspective for the availability. For the latency, we actually measured that from the server perspective. And that was because we didn't want to penalize a service's performance measurements based off of the wire, so to speak, between the client and the server. There you go. Okay, so we made. Okay. Sorry, it's a little out of sync. So we have these SLIs, so now we need these objectives. So at Favor, we have 3 tiers, tier 1 being the highest. And we set service level objectives based off the tier the team decides their service belongs to. We really believe that squads should own their services, and they should own how their services are defined. If a squad thinks they have a tier 3 service, and I think they have a tier 1 service, they have a tier 3 service. It's their decision, not mine. But depending on the tier they pick is the objective they get. So 2 nines for a tier 3, 3 nines for a tier 1, and 2.5 nines for a tier 2. For the latency, we do 99 all the way down to 90. And again, the latency target itself is also picked by the squad. So if a squad thinks it's acceptable for a service to respond in 1 second, then their latency target's set to 1 second. And if it's a tier 1 service, 99% of the requests need to happen within 1 second. Now that we have an objective, we can then make a burn rate or an error budget, and then with an error budget, you make a burn rate alarm. Go look at Google's documentation and their workbook, their SRE workbook about this, because they go into all the math and they do it very well. But just to kind of briefly cover it, your error budget is how many mistakes you're allowed to make in a given evaluation window. Favor chooses a 4-week evaluation window, and then depending on how fast you're consuming that error budget, we throw an alarm of a proportionate severity. So if you're going to burn through your error budget in 2 weeks or less, that's when we start alerting you. There is a ceremony that I'm going to go over later that we do every 2 weeks, so we don't alert based off of burning through faster than 2 weeks, because there's kind of an operational process in place that we can kind of look at services that are degrading without having to page you at 2 a.m. about it. So that's kind of what we do there. Okay, so we have our indicators, we have our SLOs, and now we need people to actually use it. Because we want our squads to own their services and own the reliability of their services. So that led to the ceremony we're covering today and the dashboard we're covering today. Again, we have 12 teams covering about 100 services. We did a kickoff call with all of them. We did the same call 12 times. And we went over what I just went over with y'all, but in a lot more detail, and then also communicated like the why and the expectations going forward for this process. That kickoff call then led to a biweekly meeting that we do every 2 weeks. SRE also does one with themselves. We also do one with DevOps, because we kind of have like that big dog food mentality, like you eat your own dog food at Favor, to make sure that if you don't want your product, why would anybody else want it? So we started this cadence. We had a meeting. We needed to name the meeting, and my boss was very smart. He called it the Service Level Operational Readiness Review, and everything in tech needs an acronym. And so you can think, we're talking about SLOs. We have a Service Level Operational Readiness Review, and the acronym we chose was ORR, for Operational Readiness Review. Completely missed it. Everyone missed it. My boss was like, whatever, it's ORR now. So this operational readiness review centers around a big dashboard that kind of is the single pane of glass and like the active report card for all of the services that belong to a team. Of course, being in Grafana Cloud, we have access to like the Prometheus and the alert manager data, but then we can also use something like the Infinity data source to reach out to third-party APIs and get that data surfaced as well. So now I'm going to go through a little mini ORR with y'all so you can kind of see what we're talking about and what conversations are happening there. So this is the first panel we go over with all of our squads. This is just the incident follow-up screen. So this actually is reaching out to our third-party IRM, reaching out to Jira, seeing the incident follow-ups that are assigned to the squad we're talking to, and then saying like, hey, do you have a Jira ticket for it? Because if they don't have a Jira ticket for it, they're not going to put it in their backlog, and they're not going to do it, right? Is your incident follow-up about to go past due? Does everyone on this team know that this incident happened and that there's a follow-up for it and what that follow-up is going to achieve? These are like the conversations we're having at this very first panel. And so it seems like a silly little thing, like, oh, here's a list of tickets you need to do, but like these tickets are pretty important because you have an incident, you find a shortcoming, and how many of us have like seen a shortcoming not addressed, it kind of just gets backlogged and never talked about or forgotten or deleted or it's not important. It's like, no, it's important. That's why we wrote it down. The next panel we'll go to is the active SLOs for the squad. So a few things here. The first one is just the list of SLOs they have configured. You can see 2 of them are boxed in. Those are hyperlinked to an SLO detail panel, like a completely different dashboard that breaks down a lot more information with those SLOs. We're going to cover those here in a second. The other panel you'll see on here is actually services that are missing SLOs. So if a team doesn't have SLO set up for the service, we kind of want to know why. In this case, they have an API service that's marked as generally available and has no SLOs on it. Probably not a good thing, right? So putting this in front of them and they go, oh, that's a good point, when you go turn them on, you know. We kind of have an automated setup for them. So we, let me actually go back. So we typically, when we're doing these, we look at any SLO that has less than 80% of its error budget remaining. That's kind of the guideline for the SRE leading the call to take a look at it in more detail with the entire squad. So we see this team has 3 services that are below 80%. I'm going to go through the 2 that are boxed in real quick with y'all and kind of tell you what we would talk about with them. The first service that had a 37%, 38% remaining error budget is for a latency SLO. So you can see here that around the 23rd, 24th, something happened. This application slowed down. It started burning through its error budget. And I would be like, hey guys, what happened here? And then someone will probably say, oh, there was a database that was under provisioned. We had to get more whatever gigawatts to it, and that made it run faster. And now we stopped burning through our error budget, right? And that's great. It's a really simple answer, but I think what's really valuable about these conversations is that like maybe the 2 people that gave it the gigawatts know about it, but the other 5 people on the team didn't, and now they do. And it's like that mini postmortem for the whole team to have there that I think is pretty great. The next SLO we're going over is the availability SLO with them. This one's at 78% of its error budget, but we can all see that graph's going up to the right. That's the right direction. A conversation like this might be, hey, why did it start going up into the right on the 13th? That's really great. And then some guy comes in and he's like, oh, well, you know, we were throwing 500s and we showed him throwing 300s, or we had an unhandled condition that we were receiving and it was throwing 500s and we added that fix. And now it's throwing valid responses and it's recouping its error budget. So again, this is like another time where someone maybe didn't know on the team, and this is like a conversation that now happens amongst the whole team of like, there was this issue, it was resolved, and it's a knowledge sharing thing. So now we're going back to the ORR dashboard, the main dashboard. And this is the next section we always cover with them. We cover active alerts. Usually, if there's an active alert, the person on call for the team is already aware of it, but sometimes they're not. So we'll go over any actively firing alerts for the squad. This squad at this time is having an active alert for one of their custom alerts. Their shopping detector isn't working. That's a cron job that they have that just wasn't running a schedule that they needed to be notified about. And then the second alert is actually like a Grafana out of the box alert. So whenever you implement all of Grafana's fancy stuff in your Kubernetes cluster and everything, you will get some helpful out of the box alerts. In this case, this one's just saying, hey, I'm configured to scrape something for metrics and it's not there. And that could be either on the pod that's presenting the metric isn't presenting it when it should be, or we have a service monitor that's like scraping something that doesn't exist. But it just leads to a little follow-up, hey, there's some configuration thing we need to check out. And then, okay. And then same panel, but the segment underneath it, we also review past alerts. Alert fatigue is a real thing. I think we all know that. This is how we proactively try to get in front of it. We look at how many alerts, how many pages the on-calls for the squad we're talking to has gotten in the past month, and we just say, was this actually helpful? Did you actually do anything when this went off? Or do you just kind of ignore it? How many times have you been ignoring this alert that goes off 30 times a month? And they're like, every time. I was like, can we turn it off? Is there a more helpful version of that alarm that you were trying to accomplish when you made this one initially? Like, that is like the conversation we have there. A great stat, I think, about alert fatigue that I can tell you about Favor is if you look at the past year, our alert volume's gone up 7%, which sounds bad, but our amount of services we have deployed in cluster has gone up 25%. So our alerts per service has actually gone down quite a bit. I'm going to go over the impact on incidents later, but just kind of remember that we are getting less alerts per service, and that is helping people sleep through the night, literally. So that was kind of like your first little mini ORR. That's not everything we cover in the ORR, but those are like the key things that have always been there in this past year. We've taken things out, we've added things in as we've had different priorities in the organization, but those are the meat and potatoes for sure. One of the big things the ORR process has helped accomplish is just SRE adoption in the organization as a whole. You know, we were a newer team. When I joined, we were only a year old, and now we're only about 2.5 years old. This has gotten all of the engineers in our organization aware of what SRE is, what we're advocating for, what these practices are. And just all that good stuff. I think another great thing to point out is we only have 4 SREs against 100 engineers. I shouldn't say against, but 4 SREs and 100 engineers. We don't have the headcount to do like the embedded SRE model. That'd be really fun, but we don't really have the capacity, right? So this is, I think, the best bang for your buck method that we've kind of found out of getting SRE to talk to every team and every team to talk to SRE. You know, we have SREs are on call. Whoever is on call that week is who leads the ORR that week. So that cycle gets every SRE in front of every squad and vice versa. Kind of helps build that relationship. From the engineer's perspective, this has probably been one of our most successful cross-team ceremonies in our organization. I think the data I can tell you as to why it's successful is that it's still happening over a year later and people keep showing up. Because if you do a boring, useless meeting that nobody wants to go to, nobody goes to it. So the fact that we still have full teams showing up every other week for this meeting, I think is a pretty good sign that they are finding what we're presenting to them as valuable. It's probably the first time that someone really sat down with the team and said, here are these principles and here's how they directly apply to your services. Going to a team and saying, hey, did you know 95% of your requests take 3 seconds? And they're like, it's supposed to take half a second? That's a pretty relevant thing for them to know. It's also really helpful that to find out that 10% of your requests are responding with 500s. Again, like these are some things that maybe squads didn't know about when we started this process, and it put it in front of them to help them make a lot of that better. The decrease in alert volume is also pretty substantial. We've also had similar amounts of incidents, but less critical incidents. I think that's a pretty good thing to acknowledge there as well, because a critical incident has a very large business impact. You know, we're talking about like the financial impacts of these things earlier. A critical incident has a quantifiable number associated to it internally with favor, and so having less of those means we are losing less money. Another thing that's kind of come out for our engineers with this process is when we started it, 1/3 of our alerts, or 1/3 of our incidents were internally reported by the engineering department, and 2/3 were coming from external sources. So think like customer support or runner support, calling us and saying, hey, this is broken, can you fix it? We've actually flipped that number since then, which is, I think, is pretty huge. So now if there's an incident that's happening, there's a 2/3 chance that we found it before a customer or some other third party did. Another great thing that's coming out of this is just general education across the organization. We have an Ask-SRE channel. We're a Slack house, and we have an Ask-SRE channel. Everyone comes to us, asks us their questions. We've gotten in the habit of tracking who is reaching out to us, how frequently, and about what. And with this process and like kind of setting out the time to talk about all these principles and get in front of them with like maybe an initiative that's coming out of DevOps, and SRE is very involved with DevOps and then like forwards the message out in this setting. They get to ask questions about it, or they get to ask questions about Grafana, or like how do I set up an alert or a push gateway. All that stuff has resulted in like a 30% decrease in questions to our Ask channel, which are all interrupts for the SRE on call. So that's kind of helping SRE stay more focused on their engineering work, and it's also kind of a testament to how our teams are more able to self-service than they otherwise would have been before. Okay, so that's kind of like the benefits that's been there for SRE and the engineering teams. I think another good value for the SRE team is just the feedback loop that we've been getting from our engineers with this ceremony. So one of the immediate things that was asked from us is, can we have more granularity on these SLOs? Think about a service that has an API endpoint that has both a get and a post method. The post method is like uploading data, and it's like writing to the database, and maybe it takes 1 to 3, 1 to 5 seconds, and that's okay. The get method needs to be like 150 milliseconds latency. It needs to be fast. So our engineers wanted just kind of a way to say, I want to know when the fast API endpoint is slow and whenever we originally were just measuring the whole service, the slow calls were penalizing the fast calls in terms of like the SLO evaluation. So one of the first things we pushed out as a result of these meetings is just per endpoint, per method SLOs for latency in particular. Just a quick list of other things that have come out of this. Front-end observability. I talked a lot about back-end stuff, a lot about API stuff. Our front-end team was getting jealous. They said, we want some fun Grafana toys. And so we set up FARO for them, front-end observability, through that. Private load zones for K6 testing. We would go to a team, you say, hey, your service is too slow under load. They're like, how do we fix it? And I'm like, you do a K6 load test. And they say, okay, but it's a private internal application. It's not accessible to the internet. How do we use that? So setting up an internal private load zone for them to run these tests through and improve the performance of their applications under load without having to test in prod. Other SLOs have also come out of this. Kafka consumer groups. Anyone here have Kafka? Anyone here think it's super easy to monitor and you have no problems with it and you always know what's going on? Yeah, so we got that problem kind of solved as well, at least from a consumer group perspective, because that was a huge ask coming out of our engineers. And then lastly, the other big thing is some more advanced alert routing. So that way, if something important happens at 2 a.m. and it can wait till 6 a.m., it waits till 6 a.m. Instead of you having to wake up at 2 a.m., write a note, and then forget what the note was, Jerry Seinfeld style with your joke, if you get that reference. So that's it for me. I hope this kind of helps everyone understand how we kind of use this dashboard as like the starting point for a lot of other conversations. It's both a place where like our engineers can go and get that initial report card, but also just kind of keeping that like intimate feel of like a small or engineering institution, even as it's growing there. So thank you all again for having me and bringing my crew over, and yeah.